North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. Greetings, my name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. What do we do here? We report the news, honestly, fairly. We analyze the news for fact and bias. In short, we de-propagandize the news to give you an honest product that you can make decisions based on. There is commentary. That's just my opinion. It's just as valuable as yours. Please, by all means, keep it in that particular lane, if you would, because my opinion is not news. It's just as valuable as yours, and I'd like to compare them, which is why we debate. So news, analysis, commentary, and debate. This is the Wells Report, and I thank you very much for joining us today. You can join our chat room by going to Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch. We are live right now between 2 and 5 p.m., Monday through Friday, although we've got some holiday things coming up here in the near future. We've got some things that what we do is we take the last couple of weeks off insofar as everybody sort of cuddles up for the holidays, and that's something that we're going to be doing today. More about that as the week goes on. But as that comes down to us, I know how somebody is going to be handling his holidays. He's going to be sitting in jail. FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried was arrested by Bahamian authorities of Bahamas. Bahamian, I guess, is how you say it. He was arrested last night after the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York shared a sealed indictment with the Bahamian government, setting the stage for extradition and the U.S. trial for the one-time crypto billionaire at the heart of the cryptocurrency exchange's collapse. His arrest is the first concrete move by regulators to hold individuals accountable for the multi-billion-dollar implosion of FTX last month. Now, in case you're wondering where this news is coming from, I'm so glad you asked. This is from CNBC, which is the only real functioning journalistic effort on the part of NBC these days. But let me tell you something. This is first-rate journalism here. Before his arrest was announced, Bankman-Fried had been expected to testify virtually before the House Finances Service Committee. That was supposed to happen today. His attorneys told CNBC he will not appear. Representative Maxine Waters, the Democrat from California who oversees that committee, said she was surprised at the arrest and disappointed that Congress would not be able to hear from him today. Damian Williams, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, said on Twitter the federal government anticipated moving to unseal the indictment this morning. CNBC's Andrew Ross Sorkin reported the charges against Bankman-Fried include wire fraud conspiracy, securities fraud conspiracy, and money laundering. If he is found guilty of those, he will likely not ever breathe free air again. Meanwhile, the Security Exchange Commission filed a civil complaint against Bankman-Fried. That happened today, alleging that the CEO of FTX engaged in a scheme to defraud equity investors in FTX. The filing said that Bankman-Fried raised more than $1.8 billion from investors, and that unbeknownst to those investors, Bankman-Fried was orchestrating a massive years-long fraud, diverting billions of dollars of the trading platform's customer funds for his own personal benefit and to help grow his crypto empire. Bahamas Attorney General Ryan Pinder said the United States was likely to request his extradition. The Royal Bahamas Police Force confirmed his arrest and said he would appear in a magistrate court in Nassau today. In a statement, Bahamian Prime Minister Philip Davis said the Bahamas and the United States have a shared interest in holding accountable all individuals associated with FTX who may have betrayed the public trust and broken the law. While the United States is pursuing criminal charges against SBF individually, that's Sam Bankman-Fried, SBF, the Bahamas will continue its own regulatory and criminal investigations into the collapse of FTX with the continued cooperation of its law enforcement and regulatory partners in the U.S. and elsewhere. Bahamian regulators and the FTX attorneys have been engaged in a bruising battle in chambers and in the court of public opinion. Earlier yesterday, FTX attorney accused the Bahamian government of allegedly working with Bankman-Fried to spirit away FTX assets from company control and into crypto wallets controlled by Bahamian regulators. Bankman-Fried's arrest by Bahamas law enforcement, as well as his expected extradition, suggests that close cooperation between the Bahamas and the U.S. will continue to evolve throughout bankruptcy proceedings. The Bahamas and the U.S. have an extradition treaty in place since the early 20th century, when the Bahamas was still under British control. The current treaty was signed in 1990, requires that the requesting party provide an arrest warrant issued by a judge or other competent authority. In November, FTX and its affiliates filed for bankruptcy, and Bankman-Fried stepped down from his role as CEO. The crypto trading firm imploded in spectacular fashion following a run on assets similar to a bank run. Everybody showed up and said, "I want all my money." And everybody did it, and the entire place collapsed. It was precipitated when reporting by CoinDesk revealed a highly concentrated position in self-issued FTT coins, which Bankman-Fried's hedge fund Alameda Research used as collateral for billions in crypto loans. Binance, a rival exchange, announced it would sell its stake in FTT, spurring a massive withdrawal in funds. The company froze assets, declared bankruptcy days later. Reports later claimed that FTX had commingled customer funds with Bankman-Fried's crypto hedge fund Alameda Research, and that billions in customer deposits had been lost along the way. Oh, man. Bankman-Fried was replaced by John J. Ray III, who had overseen Enron's bankruptcy. Ray is scheduled to testify before Congress this week. In prepared remarks released yesterday, Ray said that FTX went on a spending binge from late 2021 through 2022, when approximately $5 billion was spent buying a myriad of businesses and investments, many of which may be worth only a fraction of what was paid for them, and that the firm made more than $1 billion in loans and other payments to insiders. Ray also confirmed media reports that FTX customer funds were commingled with assets from Alameda Research. Alameda used client funds for margin trading, which exposed them to massive losses. Legal experts told CNBC that if the federal government pursues wire or bank fraud charges, Bankman-Fried could face life in prison without the possibility of release. Such a severe punishment would be unusual, but it would not be extraordinary. Ponzi scheme mastermind Bernie Madoff was sentenced to 150 years in prison. FTX's collapse had already triggered the demise of BlockFi lending and has thrown the entire cryptocurrency space into disarray. I've got to be perfectly honest with you. I've never really understood cryptocurrency. I've never understood the allure of it. I've never understood the basis of it. You know, strange, I figured out how money works. You know, U.S. currency. I figured out how money, not just U.S. currency, but the entire monetary system around the world, I figured out how it works. And it's probably one of the most amazing achievements, if not the most amazing achievement in the history of the human endeavor. The way money works, the way currency is truly a triumph. But cryptocurrency is based on nothing. And everybody says, well, the dollar's based on nothing. No, the dollar is based on the United States economy. And it's balanced against other world currencies in the international monetary system. It's a very stable organization and it works beautifully. It's perfect, in fact. And there is something behind the United States currency. Everybody sort of bought into the propaganda that the money is not based on anything. The dollar is not based on anything, and that is just simply not true. What's fascinating to me is that cryptocurrency is indeed based on nothing. It's based on just people saying, yeah, you've got this coin. Excuse me? Yeah, it's a really cool coin with a B on it. And then there were other coins and so on and so on. But people are incredulously saying, my God, this is like the wild, wild west out here. Yeah, it is like the wild, wild west out there. Nobody in the history of government regulation ever figured that someone would buy something that doesn't exist. I mean, think about this for just a couple of seconds. Non-fungible tokens, for example. You know what that is? That's an idea that only exists in cyberspace. It's an idea. And you own this idea, and you paid how much for it? And who did you pay it to? That's what I want to know. Who did you pay all this money to? The creator of the non-fungible token. And what did you get for your money? A piece of paper that said you got a non-fungible token. Uh-huh. Has anybody actually held a Bitcoin in their hands? I know they exist, but I think they're only collector's items. I mean, I just don't, I have to admit, I do not understand this. There have been friends of mine who said, yeah, I got a Bitcoin, man. My God, I paid 500 bucks for it. It's worth 22 grand. And I said, sell it now. Yeah, I'm going to wait though. You know, this is something that I've never really gotten has anybody listening to this broadcast really understood just exactly what all this was all about? Because I don't get it. I don't get it and I don't understand it. Now, what about the realities of it? There are realities. Okay, people put hard-earned money into FTX and they were trading on the exchange. And the exchange, I don't know what they were trading. Again, they're just trading stock in nothing. I mean, at least junk bonds, there was actually a bond and it actually had just this tiny little bitty value, but it was worth something. I mean, what's cryptocurrency worth? It's nothing. I think the only worth that cryptocurrency has is as a collector's item if you can actually get a an actual tangible idea of what it is. In other words, if somebody makes a little coin that looks like a Bitcoin, that's it. And the rest of it is just powered by the investments of other people in real money. Well, okay, you can get some of that money back out in various ways. SBF, for example, did get money out, and he sent it to Democrat lawmakers as campaign contributions. Now, it's very likely that most, if not all, of that money that came from FTX and went into these campaign organizations, they're obviously going to get that money back. I'm reasonably sure that even though billions had been lost, there will be some money recovered in all this. Because as all this imploded, FTX froze its assets. In other words, they're not going anywhere. And they'll be able to chase down some of this. But once again, you know, some of the richest people in the world trade in Bitcoin. And if you're really, really rich, chances are you had some sort of financial acumen to be able to develop that wealth. And yet you invested in FTX, a guy whose home office is in the Bahamas in a penthouse. It's a bunch of college kids hanging out talking about how brilliant they are. I don't get that. I just don't get it. But then again, most of my investments are in a bank account, a savings account. I mean, seriously? You're listening to the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. Back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Thanks very much for having us today. We sincerely appreciate it. If you are watching on Rumble and Patreon, or Rumble or Patreon, thank you. This show was recorded earlier today. If you'd like to take part, since you have already missed the chat room, and I'm probably not near the telephone, which is 817-379-2172. You can call that number and leave a message. I will get it. In case you're wondering, it will flash and it will say, I have messages. 817-379-2172. You can call me on the telephone. I'll get your message. Or you can send me an email. Send it to thewellsreport@frontier.com. In the subject line, put the platform that you're watching this broadcast on, and then say whatever it is you want to say, and I will get back to you just as quickly as I possibly can. I promise I will answer all those. I will. We're talking about Sam Bankman-Fried. He is now Sam Bankman jailed. He was arrested by Bahamian authorities last night, and that was because of a warrant issued for his arrest by the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. And that all came down, and he was immediately collected by Bahamian authorities, who are indeed going to look into his financial stylings, which are not good. What's interesting about all this is that he was supposed to testify today before the United States Congress. Yeah. He was supposed to give testimony today in Congress, or actually he wasn't going to be there. What he was going to do was he was going to testify to the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Financial Services about the fall of FTX. They got a copy, Forbes actually got a copy of his opening statement, the one that he was planning on saying. I can't read it word for word, but I will approximate. I would like to start, this is from his statement. I would like to start by formally stating under oath, I effed up. I know that doesn't mean much to say that I'm sorry. I'm dedicating as much of myself as I can to doing right by customers. When all is said and done, I'll judge myself primarily by one metric, whether I have eventually been able to make customers whole. If I fail our customers in this regard, I have failed myself. His statement continued by claiming that FTX management data is currently being held hostage by bankruptcy courts, so much of my testimony is less confident and detailed than I want it to be. I apologize if I'm unable to confidently answer completely reasonable questions. His statement goes on, I deeply regret giving in to pressure to sign forms that precipitated the Chapter 11 filing just a few days before the FTX International became potentially insolvent. Among other things, the Chapter 11 team was thrust into a very difficult situation. I worry that they were given misleading information by a few members of the FTX US team when they joined. They are trying to manage multiple complex global entities and systems without support from many of the teams who used to run them. I believe it will be extremely hard, if not impossible, for Chapter 11 to move forward, the Chapter 11 team to move forward constructively without working cooperatively with the many foreign jurisdictions that have direct regulatory and operational control over FTX International and its subsidiaries. To the best of my knowledge, FTX US has been and remains solvent and could pay off all of its customers in full tomorrow. Unfortunately, the Chapter 11 team has frozen the FTX US exchange, blocked customer access to their account information and funds. The customers who have lost assets are those who traded on the FTX International platforms, which do not accept U.S. residents. My primary focus right now is to do right by the customers of FTX International who are hurt. I'm fighting to make these customers as whole as I can, and I will keep doing so as long as I can see a pathway forward, because that is my duty. So there you go. Yeah. Unbelievable. Billions of dollars, if not gone completely, certainly in limbo. How will this all come out? Don't know. Now, there is something about $40 million sent to Democrat congressional candidates and political candidates. That money will be returned. And so there we go. The only thing about this is that it's not going to be much of an exciting trial because he's pretty much pled guilty to everything. This is the Wells Report. Back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. Elsewhere in the financial world, inflation throttled back significantly for a second month in November as prices for goods that surged during the pandemic continued to fall. Still, inflation remains elevated as the cost of many services kept marching higher. By the way, I want to make sure that you understand that this is from USA Today. Okay, this is this particular news copy that we're dealing with is apologetic. In other words, it goes out of its way to try to make sure that you understand that inflation is lower than it was last time we had this conversation. Last time it was 7.7%. Now it's 7.1%. What is this? Well, that means that if you go back to November, it may be October though. Let me see. It's November. If you go back to November of last year and you compare prices are up 7.1%. That is a huge number. That is a huge amount of things costing more. And they cost more because of decisions being made in Washington, D.C. Is that all President Biden's fault? No. Some of it is. The energy thing that exacerbated the inflation in the first place, cutting down American energy supply, certainly had something to do with it. And but still, we're at 7.1% from a year ago. That is also down from a 40-year high of 9.1% in June. Food and rent costs, again, are soaring. Those are offsetting declining gas prices, which are still higher than last year's or 2 years ago. This is according to the Labor Department's Consumer Price Index. The increase in inflation last month was at the slowest pace since December of last year. And it came in under expectations of 7.3%, predicted by economists surveyed by Bloomberg. As you know, my admiration for Bloomberg and its journalistic capability is muted at best. That being said, on a monthly basis, consumer prices increased just 0.1%, following a 0.4 rise in the prior month. So the thing about that is that, okay, so that's a month-for-month increase. It's still 0.1%, but it's still an increase. And remember, this is a month-to-month thing from a year ago. All right? So we will see just exactly how all that works. You also have to remember that this is October, November, and December. There's an awful lot of purchasing going on. There's a lot of purchasing going on that's going to stop. In January, things are going to stop, and you can expect there to be a much bigger jostling in these consumer prices. Core prices, which exclude volatile food and energy items and better reflect underlying trends, increased 0.2% from October, following a 0.3% bump in previous months. That lowered the annual increase from 6.3% to 6%. The better than expected news on inflation sent stocks soaring in early trading. Investors anticipated the report will prompt the Federal Reserve to dial back its aggressive interest rate hikes aimed at corralling price increases. That's wishful thinking on their part. It'll be at least 50%, 50 basis points. That will be half of 1%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average jumped about 650 points, or nearly 2%, just after trading began. Let's see where it is right now, shall we? Let me go back to CNBC here. CNBC.com. Okay. So where are we right now? Only up 155 points from all the activity earlier today. 36.02 for the S&P 500. NASDAQ's up 133.49. So the Dow is up only 0.46 points, or 0.46%. So the exuberance of earlier today has sort of calmed itself down. All right. So there's that. Now, the thing that you need to keep in mind, even though inflation is easing from a standpoint of month to month, that's not a real number. Okay. I know this is confusing, But you got to understand that there were different prices in play in November of last year. I don't know what they are specifically. All I can tell you is that there's no constant here. The only constant is from where it was last year. And the actual ebb and flow of the economic situation last year is playing into this. And so to a degree, these numbers can be manipulated in a way, not necessarily on purpose, but manipulated by things we've all forgotten. Like what were the economic ramifications of last year? I mean, I recall that it was at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, and there were serious supply chain problems, and there were serious problems getting prices, or excuse me, getting products, which meant that the prices went up pretty dramatically, farther above the norm of pre-pandemic economics. So if the inflation is still going up on top of that, you have to keep that in mind. Now, I don't have those numbers specifically, but just understand what I'm trying to tell you is that this is not a definitive, okay, so inflation is coming down. No, inflation is now measured at 7.1%. The prices are higher than they were by 7.1% than they were last November. And that's all you can really say about it. And so the White House may be walking around strutting and saying, see, inflation's coming down. No, inflation is not coming down. What's happening is that the month-to-month consumer price index is not going up as high as people were expecting. That is not, it's going down. Okay? Yeah, I like this. Inflation only increased 0.1%. Well, considering what's been going on, it shouldn't be increasing at all. Okay? I mean, but then again, like I said, this is a very, very busy buying time. My concern is that last year was a busy buying time too. And if prices are 7.1% higher than they were last year, then last year's prices were demonstrably higher than, say, for example, the norm. That explains why people are having trouble making their bills and getting all that stuff done. Still too high. We will see. We will see. Now, sooner or later, and we got to keep this in mind, sooner or later, these interest rate hikes are going to matter. They are going to actually work. The economy will cool down, but that's a recession. So there's no real good way of getting out of an inflationary spiral. Everybody's going to get hurt at some point or another. But what you have to understand is that inflation will destroy an economy. A recession will only damage it. Which do you choose? You see, the trick in all of this, the trick is to not cause inflation in the first place. And if you are looking for something that is, if you're looking for something that is a smoking gun bit of evidence that this has to do with presidential policy, you've got it. You absolutely do. The incredible amount of money poured into the economy and the curtailment of American energy production. Those two things came together for the inflation that we have. And they did not know that it was going to happen. Janet Yellen, who was the Treasury Secretary and kind of clueless, she said that she thought that the inflation was going to be transitory. There are very, very few cases where inflation is ever transitory, where it's just a little blip in prices. I don't even know what the economic conditions would have to be for that to happen. But I can tell you this, is that it caught them by surprise. They said, this probably is just a blip. Well, no, it isn't a blip. It's lasted a very long time at this point. And it's going to last longer. Because the economy is still being juiced by holiday spending, still being worked on, still being supported by consumer spending. At the end of this holiday season, in other words, January of next year, expect things to change dramatically. Dramatically. Now, there's some other stuff. There's some other information that you need to be aware of. There's a group out there that is called the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. They are a federal budget watchdog group. They are now going to spend some of their money on advertisements urging U.S. lawmakers to not add more new debt this year. Let's see if I can. No, that's not it. Okay. Let me see if I can play this for you. They say this is an audio ad. Hang on a minute. Stand by just a moment. Let me see if I can work this out. Let's see. That's not it. It's this. Okay. And let me turn this off because, yeah, this is funny. I have to change things over. And I've done that. And so this is the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget and their first radio ad. This is all audio. Enjoy.
You want to get those great gifts for your family, but inflation is skyrocketing, so you're looking for deals and trying to save money. But meanwhile, Congress is borrowing blindly, making inflation worse and driving up our national debt to a record high of $31 trillion in 2022. It's time for Congress to stop and commit to no new borrowing in 2022. Send a message to your legislators now. Text ENOUGH to 52886. Paid for by the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget.
All right. So that's essentially what they're talking about here. Okay. So the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget is saying, hey, we got to have you guys slow this down. The budget deficit, this is the amount of money that was spent beyond federal receipts. The budget deficit came in at $1.4 trillion for the fiscal year 2022, which ended September 30th. The national debt has reached $31.3 trillion. Congressional leaders are currently negotiating a year-end spending package, which might include increased budgets for certain agencies. The final agreement will yield a temporary continuing resolution or a year-long omnibus spending bill. I'm betting on the continuing resolution because the Republicans want to get in there and start taking money out of that budget. And they're going to take charge of the country, or at least the House of Representatives, and they have the power of the purse. They're going to be doing that in January. So negotiations for a year-long omnibus agreement move forward. There's a lot of work left to do. We're optimistic that if we preserve the good faith we've seen so far, that we'll get there, said Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. I think he's dreaming. According to the CRFB, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, lawmakers could easily add tens or even hundreds of billions of dollars in new borrowing if they adopt even just some of the measures they're contemplating, such as extending provisions of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which continued the expansion of the child tax credit and suspended the Medicare and or PAYGO sequester. Maya McGinnis, president of the CRFB, urged Congress to reject, quote, all non-emergency new borrowing for the rest of the year. There is no economic justification for it, given the size of the deficit and the debt, as well as the level of inflation. Quote, many lawmakers are resistant to this idea because they want to enact or extend favored pieces without being troubled with paying for them, said McGinnis. But this is a vote to worsen economic conditions at a time so many of them claim inflation is the most pressing economic issue. This is exactly the kind of legislative deal-making where Congress claims a win while future generations, saddled by our ever-growing debt, loses. She's absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. She goes on to say, quote, a pivot toward a responsible budget can begin with the smallest of steps, agreeing not to engage in any new borrowing for the next 3 weeks. A mere 19 days is about the easiest step any lawmaker can take this year. We hope the reminder that borrowing during periods of high inflation makes the job of the Federal Reserve even more difficult. It will convince some lawmakers to agree to no new borrowing for the rest of 2022. Let's hope. Let's hope that's the case. It is essential. It's essential we get this spending under control. Absolutely essential. And if we don't do it, it's going to get us. And we need to stop this. We absolutely have to stop it. And I hope we can. And I hope we do. We just don't need all this stuff. We just don't. Telephone number is 817-379-2172, 817-379-2172. If you have something you'd like to share, please, by all means, do so. 817-379-2172. Right? We're looking for what you have to say on this. Coming up in just a couple of seconds. Let's see. What's going to happen from a standpoint of the R word? We'll talk a little bit about that. And Twitter is back in the news today. No new tranches of old policy conversations among the management, at least not that I'm aware of. But it has something to do with Twitter nonetheless. We'll get to all of it as we continue. This is the Wells Report. Thanks for joining us. Back in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. We are talking about the economy on the chat room. And somebody's pointing out that that jobs are actually in pretty good shape, et cetera, et cetera. And there was a statement that the economy is growing. Well, only if you look at it from a political standpoint. This economy is recovering. And of course, this, then you start stepping into a barrel of snakes about politics and blah, 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 and who gets the credit for this and who gets credit for that. But listen, hear me out on this. Okay. So the pandemic shut down the United States economy. The United States government essentially replaced $1.9 trillion worth of spending that the economy would have made itself. Now, the economy was still ticking along, but at a very depressed way. But it was still making money. So any money that the government added was added to by the fact that the economy was still functioning. Now, as time has gone by, the economy has recovered from the self-imposed pandemic shutdown. And that is something that not a lot of people are talking about when it comes to inflation. You have to understand that the spending that was thrown into the United States economy, and that was basically on a model that I started calling macroeconomics after the 2008 recession, because what ended up happening is that everybody was like saying, is the American economy about to implode? And then the Fed said, nope, we're going to be doing just fine. You can trust us. And by golly, they did it. Well, we had something similar to that in the COVID-19 thing. Now, once again, this is out of the realm of politics here. Okay, these are things that happen. Now, you can go back to politics and say, well, you know, if you weren't spending yourselves into oblivion, we'd have some actual resources to be able to draw on. You can say that all day you want to, but let's just keep this in the real for now. So what we have here is we have the idea of essentially buying the economy out of trouble. And you do that, say, for example, in your world in a microeconomic way by dipping into your savings when times are hard. And that's basically what we're doing, except it's not really savings that we're dipping into. We're dipping into future earnings. It's like a paycheck loan. Okay? And that makes a lot of us nervous. A lot of us nervous. But what's interesting here is that as the economy is coming back, right? And all this money is in the economy, that's another driver of inflation. That's why the market is expanding, trying to soak this money up while it's available. And what's interesting here, that even though the president can't go out and say, my gosh, we've built all these jobs. He says it anyway. We've created all these jobs. You haven't created anything. What you're seeing is a recovery. And that buries the real story. The real story is just how powerful the American economy is. Just how amazingly powerful it is that we can do all the things that we have done, detrimental to our own economy. And yet it is still incredibly strong and still stronger than any other economy on the planet. And that has to do with the fact that, well, the reason that the American economy is so strong is because Americans are so strong. We are the most productive people on the planet. And yeah, you can say Bill O'Reilly is talking about how much money we've actually lost. Well, that's inflation. Okay, that's inflation. And what you have to do on that is you have to say, okay, so the money that you lost, you have to offset some of the money that you lost. And it's somewhere around it's somewhere around, I think it was, gosh, what is it? It's like $700 and something a paycheck, right? Back when inflation was really bad. It's probably somewhere around $650, $700 a month that you're actually losing. You have to understand that there were COVID paychecks that came to you during that time from the U.S. government. So you have to offset the money that you've lost with the money that the government threw into the economy to substitute for the money that you lost. Now, did they look into their crystal ball and say, okay, we're going to give them some money so that when inflation hits that there'll be this tit for tat kind of thing? No, they didn't do that because they weren't anticipating inflation because they're politicians, not economists. So yeah, there's a little bit of creative interpretation going on here. But all of these different things, you have to keep all of these different factors in place to be able to find the reality. And that's what we're trying to do here. The reality that I think you ought to take out of this is, man, this is a strong economy because the people in the United States are strong workers. Okay, that's thing number one. That's the most important thing. You have to also keep in mind that there will be a recession next year. And the Fed is very likely going to dictate the terms of how deep the recession is and how hard it hits. They are going to raise interest rates again. That is going to slow down the economy again. And we are going to have to moderate things running away. That's why when somebody said, well, wait a minute, are we going to deal with runaway inflation? No, we're not going to deal with runaway inflation. It can't happen because we're going to close down the government. We're going to close down the economy so it doesn't happen. This is the Wells Report. Back with more coming up in just a couple of moments. Thanks for joining us. Hour number 2 is next. All righty then. Did that make sense? It actually made sense to me. I'm worried. North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. Greetings. My name is John David Wells. What do we do here? Well, I'm glad you asked. We report the news. Excuse me. We also recover from colds. We report the news. We report the news fairly and truthfully. We analyze the news for fact and bias. In other words, what we do is we de-propagandize the news. We try to give you information you can make decisions on. There is commentary. That is not news. It is not propaganda. It is just what I think about what we're dealing with in these United States. But that is always checked and balanced by debate. So it's news, analysis, commentary, and debate. Something that Twitter lost its way on. Elon Musk's Twitter has now dissolved its Trust and Safety Council, an advisory group around 100% independent civil, human rights, and other organizations. The company formed in 2016 to address hate speech, child exploitation, suicide, self-harm, and other problems on the platform. The council had been scheduled to meet with Twitter representatives last night, but Twitter informed the group via email it was disbanding it shortly before the meeting was to take place, according to multiple sources. The council members who provided the images of the email from Twitter to the Associated Press spoke on condition of anonymity because they were worried about retaliation. I don't think that that's on the list of things they have to worry about. Who's going to retaliate? I mean, who's going to retaliate here? The email said Twitter was re-evaluating how best to bring in external insights, and the council is not the best structure to do this. Well, basically, what it is a collection of special interests. And that's not what you need to do. Our work to make Twitter a safe, informative place will be moving faster and more aggressively than ever before. We'll continue to welcome your ideas going forward about how to achieve this goal, said the email, which was signed by the word Twitter. The volunteer group provided expertise and guidance on how Twitter could better combat hate, harassment, and other harms, but didn't have any decision-making authority, did not review specific content disputes. Shortly after buying Twitter for $44 billion in late October, Musk said he would form a new content moderation council to help make major decisions, but later changed his mind. Yeah, you really can't. You really can't. There's a famous quote by a famous Supreme Court justice regarding pornography, and when asked to define it, he says, "Well, I know it when I see it." You know hate speech when you see it. You know bigotry when you see it. You know self-harm when you see it. One of the great brilliances of the U.S. Constitution is how little there actually is for the government to do. One of the best ways, one of the very best ways to moderate speech is to not moderate speech. There are basic ideas. There are basic policies. We have them here on the Wells Report. Like, for example, we are very ill at ease to report personal misfortune, right? We're very ill at ease to report it and jump into the sensationalist idea of somebody making a spectacular screw up. The reason that we spoke, say, for example, Sam Bankman-Fried. You know, Sam Bankman-Fried is a guy who is and was way in over his head, had no idea what he was doing. And you can either, and we're once again stuck with the idea of either he's incompetent or he's malevolent. And which is it? You know, he's not exactly behaving as a malevolent person would. You can go back to Bernie Madoff and how he handled his situation. This kid's just been talking to everybody. I mean, obviously, you know, one of the advantages of being a little bit older is that you got to see the television series Dragnet. And Dragnet started with, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. That's the Miranda right, the Miranda rights. And He just absolutely blew it right out of the weeds. And I absolutely know that the lawyers that are dealing with Sam Bankman-Fried are going to have to say, guys, you really hurt yourself here. What we're going to do now is damage control and try to give you some opportunity of getting out of jail someday. That is the best you can hope for. And so we'll see. But we have this mess, and we try not to add to it by turning ourselves into something along the line of, the people that are theoretically, standing in judgment. We don't do a lot of trial by media on the Wells Report. So these are just little policies that we have. And what Twitter needs to do is needs to get very, very simple and very, very basic and very, very consistent with their content moderation policies. You will know when you're dealing with hate speech. I go to Twitter every day. I don't see a lot of it. I got to be honest with you. I think it's, the possibility of hate speech is not hate speech. And people are trading on the possibility that there's going to be hate speech as opposed to actual hate speech. And I'm pretty sure that the moderators in place in Twitter will be able to handle the basic decision making necessary to be able to keep that platform, shall we say, safe. I mean, you're in the public square. You're as safe as you think you're going to be, and you're as safe as the people in the public square. In other words, buyer beware. This was yesterday's news. We normally don't do yesterday's news, but there was so much news yesterday, we didn't have a chance to really get into it, and this is important. This came out of the Washington Post, which is kind of surprising when you consider what this story is all about. Some Hunter Biden allies are making plans to go after Hunter Biden's accusers. This is dangerous. These people need to calm down and back off. I'll explain why coming up in just a little bit. The subheadline on the Matt Visser and Michael Scherer story from the Washington Post says an array of groups are preparing to defend the president's son against an unexpected or unexpected GOP onslaught, but they lack a unifying strategy. Yeah, that's because they need to stick to the Constitution of the United States, and they better not start tampering with witnesses, because that's what they're going to do here. Hunter Biden's friend and lawyer Kevin Morris was blunt in laying out his thoughts at a strategy session last September on an expected onslaught of investigations by House Republicans. It was crucial, Mr. Morris said, for Hunter Biden's camp to be more aggressive. The meeting was at Morris's California home. He described defamation lawsuits the team could pursue against the presidential son's critics, including Fox News, Eric Trump, Rudy Giuliani. He outlined extensive research on two potential witnesses against Hunter Biden, a spurned business partner named Tony Bobulinski, and a computer repairman named John Paul Mac Isaac. Now, Tony Bobulinski, all he did was keep track. All he did was do his due diligence, which was to keep track of all the paperwork. And he was someone who was besmirched by the Biden family that called his security clearance into question, because he is also a U.S. Naval Reserve officer. And he told them to stop it right immediately, and they did not do it. And he started protecting his reputation. That's how Tony Bobulinski got involved in all this, aside from making the decision to hang out with the Bidens. John Paul Mac Isaac, the computer repairman, had nothing to do with the fact that Hunter Biden came into his shop and dropped off a computer for repair. This is a guy who is the quintessential pawn in a gigantic and evil chess game of politics in the U.S. This guy is, you can look at what he did and you can say, boy, if I turn my computer over to somebody, do they make a copy of my hard drive? There's nothing on it, but Still, that's not something that I would want them to do because that's my intellectual property. See, I do this for a living. The stuff that I say, my commentary, my opinions, and so on and so forth, that's my intellectual property. And I kind of protect it whenever I can. And so when somebody would just download all my stuff, I'd sit there and go, well, no, wait a minute. That's really not yours. It's really mine. So let me have it back, please. But John Paul Mac Isaac made his decisions and then did the right thing. After he downloaded the hard drive of the computer, he contacted the FBI. And they said, no, thanks, until it blew up. And then suddenly there was a subpoena and somebody rapping on John Paul Mac Isaac's door. At one point, Hunter Biden himself happened to call into the meeting, connecting briefly by video to add his own thoughts. Quote, they feel there's a whole counter narrative missing because of the whole Hunter Biden hater narrative out there, said liberal activist David Brock, who attended the meeting. What we really got into was more like the meat of it, the meat of what a response would look like. Brock was planning for a new group, Facts First USA, focusing on fighting the looming House GOP investigations. The meeting was a glimpse into a sprawling infrastructure that is rapidly, almost frantically assembling to combat Republican plans to turn Hunter Biden into a major news story when the GOP takes over the House next year. The risk for Hunter Biden, and possibly for President Biden as well, is this hodgepodge of efforts is not fully coordinating and does not share a unified approach. According to people involved in the effort who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss internal dynamics. Let me explain what's going on here, okay? These people are trying to figure out how to manage Hunter Biden's laptop and the information that comes out regarding Hunter Biden's laptop through Tony Bobulinski and John Paul Mac Isaac. And what they're doing here is they're about to fall into conspiracy. Okay? You see, if you start working on, say, for example, trying to destroy the people who are testifying against your client, in this case, Hunter Biden, what you're doing is you're starting to conspire. The simple case of the matter is the laptop is evidence. The evidence is not going anywhere. The evidence, for all intents and purposes, is public. It cannot be manipulated. It cannot be changed. It cannot be erased. It cannot be bleach bitted because it's already out there. The only way that you can stop what is going to happen with Hunter Biden and probably President Biden as well is to try to stomp on the people that are actually going to be telling the story. In quite literal terms, killing the messenger. Now, we've seen an awful lot of law set aside for the sake of politics in the United States of America. But I don't think that crushing those people who are going to honestly testify to what they know and what they believe to be true in an effort to shut them up is going to work this time. The only thing that they can do is they can just get involved in exactly what's out there. They've got the computer too. They better start going through it and start anticipating about the questions they're going to be asked, and they better have good answers. And they better stop thinking about crushing the people actually telling the story. This is the Wells Report. Back with more in a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. You know, there are a lot of things that are going on with regards to the Biden family. And all of them are easily explained by the terms national peril. One of the problems with politics and the division in the United States right now is that, for very, very good reasons, people are angry about the way they're being treated and being referred to. I am extremely annoyed about the fact that anybody who voted for Donald Trump is a bigot, is a domestic terrorist, is a racist, so on and so on and so on. All of these names have been called to people who voted for Donald Trump. That has led to a huge amount of anger. The idea, another one of those, is the idea that the people of the United States elect a black man to be the president of the United States, only to watch racism in the United States spring up all over again. Because the people that manage race as a political tool in the United States didn't want to see that tool weakened. And consequently, any chance to add to the racial fire was taken advantage of. And that persists to this day, which is why when I talk about racism in the United States, I say, now, wait a minute, are you talking about genuine racism, or are you talking about the exploitation of racism? Because of these things, because of these raw feelings, what ends up happening is that people say, I can hardly wait to see those guys perp walked in front of the United States in chains and orange jumpsuits. And arguably, they've got a good point. When you start thinking about, Clinton aides and advisors having to deal with exactly that scenario, it does make you want to see it. But you have to remember something. We're talking about presidents of the United States, because there are presidents who have serious, very serious legal issues. Some more serious than others, some more contrived than others, but still they're serious. And we have seen that the political forces in play are essentially having a gang war being fought over the fertile battleground of American sensibilities, your sensibilities and my sensibilities, whether our politics agree or not. Arguably, there are a couple of presidents from a couple of different parties that could end up facing serious legal peril and could indeed end up in a situation where they're fighting for their freedom in a court of law. That's not a win for either side. What we have seen with the demolishment of how we deal with our presidents in these United States shakes the foundation of this nation to its very core. Now, am I saying that we sweep all this stuff under the rug? Not in any way, shape, or form. What I say is let's try to contain the glee over the possibility of watching someone whose politics we vehemently disagree with being turned into a felon in front of our very eyes on national television. Let's not talk about it. May indeed have to happen, but if it does happen, it will be a source of decades-long shame for we, the people of the United States. This is the Wells Report. We'll be back with more coming up in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172, 817-379-2172. I'm not the only one saying that what we need to do in order to solve this issue is to return to benevolent civility. We must return to benevolent civility. We must return to a nation of law. We must agree that our laws are just and return to those laws. This idea of fighting fire with fire means that the biggest fire wins, whether there's any truth attached in the flames or not. And that's not what we need. What we need to do is we need to be responsible. We need to be responsible stewards of the people of the United States and this nation that we all live in. We must stand for our laws. And we must, in a respectful way that recognizes the fact that everybody is innocent until proven guilty, make a reasoned inquiry into where we stand with regards to everybody in this political sphere, just like we would with anybody who's not in the political sphere. One of the biggest mistakes made by the January 6th committee was to set aside benevolent law enforcement for the shrill fire and heat of politics. And they didn't have to do it. Gerald Nadler, of all people, said, we've got to let the president speak here. Shut down by Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. That was a huge mistake. In other words, everything, and by the way, the January 6th committee is going to have one more public hearing, and then they're going to release their report. They're saying already that everything that we've said is true, and the DOJ must take action. Well, no, the DOJ is not going to take action unless there's an actual case there. And they don't know that there's an actual case there because there hasn't been any argument yet. And the DOJ is simply not going to be picked up, even with Merrick Garland running the place. They're simply not going to be swept into the gutter of politics to be ruined for all time by rushing ahead with a political noose around Donald Trump's neck. They're just not going to do it. And oh, by the way, 74 million Americans will not allow them to do it. But that's where we find ourselves here. You'll note that I say don't show up with weapons when you show up at, say, for example, some federal building to redress your grievances. Show up with a flag and a copy of the Constitution and 10 million of your closest friends. That's what I'm saying. That's all you really have to do. If it gets any worse than that, then take part in the Nothing Rebellion. Do not take part in anything having to do with the American system. Don't go to work. Don't cash your paychecks. Don't do anything. Don't buy gasoline. Don't do anything. You're going to have to be able to support yourself for a couple of months. And it's going to have to be everybody taking part in it. You know, if you don't pay your bill, they turn off your electricity. If everybody in your town doesn't pay their bill, they leave your electricity on. And that is how we deal with this. Standing for the rule of law, benevolent civility. And if we descend to anything else, then they win. Simple as that. The destroyers, the dividers, the anti-Americans win. Remember, Antifa is powerless unless you're there to be hit with a frozen milkshake. If you're there to be hit, they win. And so what we have here is we have a discussion going on over 81 million people who demand accountability for Donald Trump. Well, what about the 74 million people who demand accountability for Joe Biden? I pointed out something there about the idea that there's somebody out there that believes that just because 81 million, by the way, it's 81 million citizens voted for the president, that 81 million votes makes him above the law? No, the answer is no. No, that's not what happens. One of the problems with dividing America is that you end up with two different camps. And they're roughly equal. And that is a political miscalculation. The people that have brought us to this point in our American history have badly miscalculated. And then they are compounding their miscalculation through the process of hypocrisy. One-sided law enforcement. The 81 million side wins. We set aside the law enforcement for anybody else. We don't equally provide law enforcement for everyone. Those on our side are treated one way. Those on their side are treated another way. Deepening the division. Creating a bigger problem. Yeah, let's see. Somebody on the, it's Isaac. Isaac says 74 million doesn't make somebody above the law either. True. True. But take a look at the evidence, the so-called evidence against Donald Trump. Take a look at the fact that the Mueller investigation found nothing. Because they were investigating a heck of a lot more than just so-called Russian collusion. They didn't find anything. Take a look at the possible evidence that they came up with in the January 6th committee. Which is more damning? The evidence that we've already seen so far, based on Hunter Biden's laptop, or the evidence that has led to nothing against Donald Trump, which is more condemning? We haven't even investigated Hunter Biden's laptop. Just what we know is frightening enough. Frightening enough, in fact, for me to say, cool your jets. There are people trying to figure out how they can trash anybody who happens to be sharing the message of what Hunter Biden and perhaps the Biden family, what they've been up to from a standpoint of peddling influence, Joe Biden's influence. They're trying to get their crap together so they can stomp these people, like a computer repairman in Delaware. How dare they? But we, the people of the United States, have got to calm down and insist. And whether you're a Democrat or whether you're a Republican, you need to insist that the Republicans have their opportunity to investigate all this. Insist that the Republicans go back through everything, and they're trying to do it, by the way, go back everything that the January 6th committee put out. And this time put out everything else. Put out all the rest of the videotape. Instead of cutting to the, let's say, 10%, this is just a wild guess. It's a wild ass guess, okay. Instead of the 10% that is salacious and that condemns Trump, let's see part of the 90% that doesn't. Because there were an awful lot of people on that Capitol, granted, they shouldn't have been there in the first place, just standing around singing songs. Most of them, in fact. We didn't see any of that. We saw and heard lies that police officers were killed when they were not. Were they injured? Yes. And is that bad enough? Yes. There were 100 police officers that got bashed. That's outrageous. And that would have been enough of a story had they not lied about the other police officers that shot themselves and died of natural causes. One, of course, lying in state in the Capitol Rotunda in a melodramatic lie to the American people. One of the things that we have to deal with in the United States as aggrieved populations, and we all are, Black people are aggrieved because they are victims of racism. White people are aggrieved because they are also victims of new racism, and they are victims of people calling them racists when they have never done a racist thing in their entire lives. People who voted for Donald Trump are aggrieved that they've been called domestic terrorists. People who voted for Joe Biden are being criticized for their decision-making. But the way to set all this aside is to start looking for truth, instead of looking for ways to win the argument. Actually start looking for truth. If you're a Democrat or a Republican, if you're just an American, you want the Republican Party to move forward with their investigations. Because you want the truth, not because you want the Republicans to win or the Democrats to win. You want the truth. That way America wins. That's why this country is the greatest country in the history of the human endeavor. Because we are a nation of laws, not a nation of political bickering. And that's where we are now. We need to stop. We need to concentrate on the reality of things. There are some mighty powerful things that say the Biden family traded on Joe Biden's political celebrity. Influence buying. That's against the law. We need to chase that down. The people with the information need to be heard, not destroyed or vilified by a conspiracy of people trying to get them to shut up. In fact, those people, and they have been identified, strangely enough, by the Washington Post. The Washington Post did this story that I was telling you about with regards to all of these forces gathering around Hunter Biden to get ready to stomp on all the messengers. The messenger killing ideas that are being bandied about by this defense cabal. And how the Washington Post saying the only problem with this is that all these disparate defenses of Hunter Biden aren't working together. Well, if they work together, that's a conspiracy. And if they are a conspiracy, that's a breakage of federal law. Which is why they are not going to proceed in a conspiracy. And they shouldn't. The Republicans, if they're going to do all this stuff with Hunter Biden's laptop, better make damn sure that Hunter Biden can explain, has a chance to explain all of it. Has a chance to tell his side of the story. And if they are going to keep it out of federal court, which isn't necessarily a bad idea, if they are going to keep it out of federal court, and they are going to make sure that it is some sort of political proceeding, then they had better follow the Bill of Rights and grant due process to all parties, which is not what happened in the January 6th committee. And I got to be honest with you. If I was up there on Capitol Hill and I had a position of leadership in the Republican Party, which is a joke because I think the Republican Party, I would go through the Republican Party leadership like a sieve. But if I was a member of that Republican Party, what I would do is I'd take everything that the January 6th committee went through and I'd do it again. Only this time, I would make it absolutely fair to both sides. That's what I would do. And I'd put it in front of the American people. And that's what I implore them to do with Hunter Biden. Tell both sides of the story, put it in front of the American people, or go ahead and let's start getting the federal indictments done. Because that gives us a chance to be a nation of laws again. And if we want to do it that way, then by God, let's do it that way. But if we're going to do it politically, then let's guarantee due process to all sides. We don't need to see somebody like Joe Biden or Donald Trump perp-walked in an orange jumpsuit in chains. This is the Wells Report. Back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. If you find value in this broadcast, please share it with your friends. Please support us by subscribing to this broadcast. Ask your friends to do the same thing. Give us a thumbs up or a like or whatever it is on your platform that says, hey, this isn't a bad show. If you'd like to support the show financially, go to patreon.com/The Wells Report. That's patreon.com, patreon.com/The Wells Report. You can throw me a buck every month. A couple of bucks, $5, whatever you got. It's perfectly fine with me. Okay? And it adds up. By the way, and I know the actual, the actual model of what we do here is not based on you paying for it. Okay? It's based on advertisers paying for it, but I've got to prove that I have an audience to be able to sell to advertisers before that money can start rolling in. And that's why when I say, share this with your friends and ask them to listen. And oh, by the way, ask them to give me feedback. Okay, this show sucks because, this show is great because, what have you? All right, so I can improve it. Because I think that what we do here is important. And I'd like to be able to sell it to people and not have a guilty conscience. I'd like this to be a valuable resource for the American people. Oh, believe me, if I am able to do this financially a lot better than I'm doing it right now, this will be a hell of a lot better show because I'll have more people working on it instead of just me. But first, I have to prove that this thing is valuable. And I'm asking for your help. Pass it along to your friends. Ask them to listen. Ask them to pass it along to their friends if they find value in it. Because this has to happen. There has to be somebody doing it, and I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing anybody else doing this. If you're seeing somebody else do this, by all means, let me know who they are so I can have them on the broadcast. Okay? All right. There is a piece here that was written by Jonathan Turley about Hunter Biden and about how Biden family allies are now gathering around Hunter and trying to figure out ways of stomping the messengers as they try to find truth. Now, make no mistake, all right? There's an awful lot of untruth out there that's going to be reported as truth because it's political. But when I'm just sitting here talking to you a moment ago about the value of this show, I can recognize that stuff and I'll report it. I will report it. I will report the truth, not the political propaganda, regardless of who comes out looking better at the end of it. I don't care. The only thing I care about is truth. And just like anything else, you'll know it when you see it. Anyway, Jonathan Turley wrote this piece, and I want to make sure that you hear it. And I'm going to do this next hour, which means that we got a couple of minutes here to share. Okay? Let's see. Let me go back to something right here. I was talking just a moment ago about just grabbing percentages out of my head. You know, of all the things that the January 6th committee looked at, you know, I was talking about the video. 90% of that video, in my opinion, was not salacious from a standpoint of what actually happened on it. Because remember, it lasted for hours and hours and hours. If you add up all the video that we saw, it adds up to somewhere around 30, 35 minutes. But there were hours and hours and hours of it. So when I say that 90% of it was not especially salacious in any way, that's a pretty good estimate. When I say that in an effort to over-sensationalize the damage to the police forces, that we lost the real and true story of, and inexcusable story, of 100 police officers that were injured in that mess, and that's inexcusable. Yeah, people ought to spend time in jail for hurting police officers. Abso-flippin-lutely. But that's not the story that the January 6th people told. They told about police officers losing their lives, trying to sensationalize, and in so doing, losing the actual story. Because the police officers that lost their lives, suicide, natural causes. In other words, there's a whole bunch of information there that we've never seen because it was very carefully managed by the January 6th committee, which is the big problem that I have with it. I don't want the Republican Party to disband the January 6th committee. What I want them to do is I want them to add a completely fair panel of people that will go back through every piece of information and then rewrite the report that's going to come out in a few days. That's what I want to see. I don't want to see the Republican Party do exactly what the January 6th committee did when it comes to Hunter Biden's laptop. I don't want them to create a Republican holier-than-thou lynch mob to try to be a counterweight to the Democrat holier-than-thou lynch mob trying to bring down Donald Trump. I want truth. And we know how to get it. We rely on our justice system. We rely on the amendments to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. And we commit to them. We don't have to have this debate in a courtroom. We can have it in the courthouse of public opinion, which, by the way, is the capital of the United States. But we have to get politicians who will actually do the right thing. Do you know any? This is the Wells Report, back for hour number 3 in just a moment. Thanks very much for being with us. Hang in there. North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. Greetings, my name is John David Wells. What do we do here? We report the news, honestly, fairly. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We point out both. I make commentary. That is not news. It's just my opinion, just as valuable as yours. And we debate. News, analysis, commentary, and debate. The objective is truth, not political advantage. I spend more time trying to explain the virtues of due process, a nation of laws, equal protection under the law, than I spend on just about any other topic. And we're doing that today. Spent a lot of time talking about Hunter Biden yesterday in the last hour. And what the Republican Party is planning on doing. And Jonathan Turley wrote a piece about this yesterday, and I want you to hear it. This from the New York Post. Jonathan Turley, in case you do not know, Jonathan Turley is a serious guy. Let me get down to his... he is an attorney and professor at George Washington University Law School. He's a trial lawyer. He's a serious dude. And he's brilliant. And this is what he wrote regarding the idea that there are forces marshaling themselves around the Biden family and Hunter Biden specifically to wreak havoc on those people who would attempt to tell what they consider to be the truth. We don't know whether it's true or not. We don't know that anything we've seen on the Hunter Biden laptop is true because we haven't seen all sides of it yet. The Republican Party said they're going to go and have an investigation. And make no mistake, not only is this an investigation on Hunter Biden, but it's also an investigation in President Biden and blah, 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 blah. Is what they did with President Trump in any way, shape, or form right or proper or fair? No. Is it going to make it right and proper and fair if they decide to do the same thing to President Biden? No. No? What they need to do is what we do on this show. Marshal the facts. Report them honestly. Debate their meaning. Allow the people to decide. I know that may sound self-serving, but that's what we do here. And that's what they need to do there. So back to Jonathan Turley from the New York Post. Listen carefully to this. Just when you thought our politics could not get more poisonous, a recent meeting in California suggests the past is mere prelude. The Washington Post, which revealed the powwow, described the Biden family allies planning an offensive to blunt any investigation into the Biden's alleged multi-million-dollar influence peddling schemes. Republicans will see it more like a gathering of the Legion of Democrat Doom. Some of the more controversial political operatives are involved in the all-hands-on-deck effort to protect the Bidens. The California meeting's host was none other than Hunter Biden's friend, agent, and lawyer Kevin Morris. Now listen carefully to this. After Hunter Biden was placed under investigation for, among other possible charges, tax evasion, Kevin Morris, his friend, agent, and lawyer, paid off as much as $2.8 million in back taxes for Hunter Biden. Now remember something. $2.8 million in back taxes does not absolve tax evasion. That charge is still hanging out there. But the temptation is to go, well, he paid it back. Yeah, what the hell? Yeah. Morris, per the Washington Post. Now, remember, this is the Washington Post. The Washington Post is not a conservative anything. Morris, per the Washington Post, called for a more aggressive response to those seeking to investigate alleged influence peddling. The plan includes hitting critics, such as Fox News, with defamation lawsuits. For full disclosure, I appear as a legal analyst on Fox News. That's true. The paper also reports that Morris outlined an extensive research on two potential witnesses against Hunter Biden, a spurned business partner named Tony Bobulinski and a computer repairman named John Paul Mac Isaac, Spurned is hardly the sole or most relevant description of Bobulinski. The businessman was recruited by the Biden family to manage foreign deals and later directly contradicted President Biden's claim that he knew nothing of those dealings. His testimony could present a serious threat in the coming House investigation in establishing not only the president's knowledge, but his possible receipt of proceeds from the deals. That is graft and corruption. And the American people need to know if that occurred. Now, I said something last hour that I want to repeat here. Somebody pointed out, well, 81 million people voted for President Biden, so all of this is just inflammatory to them. Well, 81 million votes doesn't put you above the law, just as 74 million votes didn't put Donald Trump above the law, according to all the people that immediately set aside the law to try to convince the American people that Donald Trump is some sort of criminal without actually giving him due process of law, so that he could prove it, or it could be proved one way or another. I don't want the Republican Party to follow in those awful footsteps. What we want to find out is whether or not President Biden actually participated in graft and corruption. We need to know that, especially when some of that graft and corruption involve Ukraine and China. Those two countries are in the news. If American policy is being, shall we say, influenced in the Oval Office of the United States regarding China and Ukraine, and the president was a recipient of funding from both of those countries, we need to know that. Do we need to do anything about it? That remains to be seen. But we need to know that. And moreover, it needs to be public information so the president can certainly do other things besides live down to the most base estimates of what he could be doing if he was bought by either of those countries. Going on with Jonathan Turley. What's most interesting about the piece is why the Washington Post was given such access and such a detailed account of this war tribunal, this war council forming around Hunter Biden. Generally, political operatives lay out scorched earth campaigns in secret, but someone wanted this campaign to be public before the House can call any witnesses. For key witnesses like Bobulinski, the message is about as subtle as a 2x4 to the head. The Washington Post is viewed as one of the most pro-Biden newspapers in the country, and only recently admitted that Hunter Biden's laptop was authentic after pushing the false Russian disinformation claim. Now the paper is detailing a plan that could create an open season on those who might try to substantiate the Biden family's influence peddling. Notably, the article stresses efforts operating separately from the White House. David Brock said his organization also remains independent of Hunter Biden and his team and is following its own strategy. The separation is important to deflect any allegations of witness intimidation or, as I brought up earlier, conspiracy. Media and political figures leveled such claims against the Trump White House when impeachment witnesses were attacked in the press. Congressional Democrats denounced criticism of the witnesses in an effort to silence or deter witnesses from coming forward. Those who view this as a not-so-veiled threat will likely cite the inclusion of David Brock, one of the most controversial and reviled Democrat operatives in Washington. Long a radical figure closely associated with Hillary Clinton campaigns, Brock has repeatedly been at the center of controversial attack campaigns and was most recently tied to news sites criticized as fakes or ploys. Now again, Jonathan Turley is saying this. He's a member of the bar. Obviously, he has different encumbrances when it comes to telling the truth in public. But remember, none of this is proven. Many see Mr. Brock as the lowest common denominator of Democrat operatives, someone willing to take extreme measures to support Democrat figures and causes. Even Biden senior advisor Neera Tanden recently once remarked, I hope Hillary truly understands how bat-s crazy David Brock is. Brock, however, has always given figures like Clinton deniability for direct responsibility for his actions. He described his new group Facts First USA is a SWAT team designed to ensure the media and public do not accept the false narratives that flow from congressional investigators. Sure, how come there wasn't a Republican version of that when the January 6th committee was going after the president? I'll tell you why. Because the Republican Party doesn't have the guts to lead in that way. The Democrats do. The Post described the meeting as a glimpse into a sprawling infrastructure that is rapidly, almost frantically, assembling to combat Republican plans to turn Hunter Biden into a major news story when the GOP takes over the House next year. It also discussed an array of well-known lawyers the Biden family has assembled, as well as plans by the White House and Democrat National Committee. Various Democrat groups plan to attack efforts to disclose the Biden's multi-million-dollar efforts by attacking Donald Trump's family. This includes the Congressional Integrity Project, which recently hired Jeff Peck, the chief of staff to Biden when he was a senator. These talking points are already appearing in the media, which are heavily invested in denying any scandal connected with the family. Why is that? Well, because the mainstream media was all in for Joe Biden. And it was all over the press. And so there's no hiding from it. And so, if there is a scandal connected to the Biden family, the mainstream media is neck deep in it, especially since they refuse to cover the Hunter Biden laptop story. In fact, are doing everything they possibly can to squelch it. So once again, remember, in a circumstance where this is taking part in the court of public opinion, remember who shapes public opinion. They're on the other side. Not the other side of the Republicans, the other side of truth. And that's a completely different thing. That's the statement I'm making. A lot of people say, well, the mainstream media is biased left. Well, obviously. But what they're also biased against is truth. And that's why I have a problem with them. Not because of politics, I could care less. But they don't report the truth. And they don't report truthfully. Two different concepts. And I won't have that. That's why I do this show. Because there's going to be a voice telling the truth. Getting back to Jonathan Turley. The Post article, Washington Post article, looks like a shot across the bow of any potential witnesses. This is not to say these reporters are knowing agents of the campaign, but Democrat operatives clearly want people to know about an alliance gathering around Hunter Biden and the Biden family. A war council. And their willingness to, in a grotesque display of misuse of the legal system, start throwing lawsuits at people, trying to get them to shut up, instead of throwing those resources into trying to find the truth. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. Jonathan Turley in the New York Post, more of which is next. Stay put. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. The telephone number is 817-379-2172. You can find this Jonathan Turley column in the New York Post, newyorkpost.com. Just search Jonathan Turley. It'll pop right up. You don't want to miss this. You want to read this yourself. Go to newyorkpost.com. By the way, the article in the Washington Post, which is what we're discussing, talks about how there's this war council forming itself around the Biden administration to insulate the Biden family and the administration from a promised Republican investigation into what the Biden family has been up to, including Hunter Biden's laptop. There's already been misconduct with regarding the reporting of that laptop. There was information in the laptop, for example, that was exculpatory to President Donald Trump during the Mueller campaign, the Mueller investigation. And the FBI didn't report it, even though they had the computer. That's going to hurt them because that's coming out. That's part of that other stuff that the January 6th committee just won't report, which is what makes it illegitimate, which makes it not news, makes it propaganda. There's enough propaganda perpetrated on the American people. I can't see any reason. I can't see any reason why I should add to that tote board. But this is not propaganda. This is learned information from Jonathan Turley. Let's continue. The article touches all the bases to insulate the Bidens from the Bidens and the Democrat National Committee from the political operatives Brock and Morris and what they might unleash. However, the inclusion of former Biden staff and allies, it's a line that can quickly be lost as investigations heat up. Targeting witnesses like Bobulinski could invite congressional investigators to look closely at the groups and how they fund themselves and where they're getting their information. That would be a mess. Morris, the friend, lawyer, and benefactor of Hunter Biden, could also be taking a risk. There are already questions about whether he was acting as a counsel agent or friend when he paid off the tax debts, $2.8 million for Hunter Biden. Rules of professional ethics demand clarity in legal representation. Moreover, Morris himself could be called as a witness and face questions over his own role in the scandal and its suppression in the media. That makes orchestrating an aggressive public campaign more problematic if it targets or intimidates other witnesses. That's what I mean. They've got to be really careful here. This is, of course, well known to the sophisticated political operatives, which makes the effort to publicize the campaign all the more concerning. House Democrats have blocked efforts to investigate any Biden influence peddling. They will have to take ownership of that refusal if the investigation establishes a massive and corrupt operation, which is beginning to look more likely every day. But the new campaign is designed to give plausible deniability and comfortable distance from planned attacks on witnesses and commentators. Hunter Biden may have collected millions in selling access and influence. But anyone investigating or accusing the Bidens is now fully warned. Proceed at your own peril. We, the people of the United States, must demand the truth. We must demand that these dark agents leave the messengers alone. Attack the message if you wish. Leave the messengers alone. Every time they take a shot at somebody like Terry Bobulinski or Mr. Isaac, the computer repairman, what that does is get them closer to an eventual, if required, opinion on the part of the American people that leads to a guilty verdict in the court of public opinion. We, the people, have to start paying very close attention and demand fairness and accountability for all sides, or we'll lose this thing. This is the Wells Report. Back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. Thanks very much for being a part of our show. So, a while back, President Trump said that he was going to be a presidential candidate in 2024. And there was a bright patch of anti-Trump reporting, which has lost its real value insofar as everything the mainstream media has ever reported about Donald Trump. Well, not everything. 5% of what they've reported about Donald Trump has been positive. The rest of it has been negative. That's right. 95% of news coverage on the nation's 45th president has been negative. And so every time there's this mainstream media thing that garbages President Trump, people go, eh. Now, there is the latest of this comes from USA Today. Republican support for Donald Trump's presidential bid in 2024 has cratered, they say in the article. Going on to say an exclusive USA Today Suffolk University poll has found that as the former president is beleaguered by midterm losses and courtroom setbacks. By a 2-to-1 margin, GOP and GOP-leaning voters now say they want Trump policies, but a different standard bearer to carry them. 31% want the former president to run. 61% prefer some other Republican nominee who would continue the policies Trump has pursued. They have a name in mind. 2/3 of Republicans and those inclined to vote Republican want Florida Governor Ron DeSantis to run for president by double digits. 56 to 33% prefer DeSantis over Trump. Republicans and conservative independents increasingly want Trumpism without Trump, said David Paleologos, the director of the Suffolk University Political Research Center. The findings are a red flag for Trump, says the article, whose core support has held remarkably solid through firestorms over his personal behavior, his provocative rhetoric, and his most controversial actions in the White House. But he has become increasingly embattled over his role in fueling the January 6, 2021 assault on the Capitol, his alleged mishandling of sensitive documents when he left the White House, and investigations into efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Now remember, this is USA Today. This is biased. This is USA Today reporting on a USA Today poll, compounding the bias. I'll explain all this in a moment. Some Republican strategists, unnamed by this article, blame Trump and his influence for the GOP failures to win control of the Senate in November. Candidates he helped recruit and support in Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania lost races that independent analysts thought might have been won by more traditional candidates. The poll of 1,000 registered voters taken by landline and cell phone Wednesday through Sunday has a margin of error of plus or minus 3.1 percentage points. The sample of 374 Republicans and independents who lean to the Republican Party has an error margin of 5.1%. Enthusiasm for Trump's third bid for the White House within the GOP has significantly ebbed in recent months, according to the USA Today Suffolk survey. In July, 60% of Republicans wanted Trump to run again. In October, that number has dipped to 56%. Now it's fallen to 47%, an almost even split with the 45% who don't want him to run for a third time. The polls taken in July and December were of registered voters. The poll in October was of likely midterm voters. Trump is viewed less favorably by his partisans as well. The percentage of Republicans who see him favorably have dropped from 75% in October to 64% in December. His unfavorable rating has risen to 23% from 18%. Among all voters, Trump has fallen further behind President Joe Biden in a hypothetical head-to-head rematch. Now Biden would win a general election matchup by 47 to 40%. Because of the effects of rounding, Biden's margin is a bit wider than that indicates at 7.8%. In October, Biden also led, but by a narrower margin, 46 to 42%. President Biden has not seen his political standing get much worse, but it also hasn't gotten much better. Since October, his favorable rating has ticked up a percentage point, 46%. His unfavorable rating is down a point to 50%, but support among Democrats for him to seek a second term has declined to 40% from 45%. Among all voters, just 23% want him to run again. While Biden now leads Trump, he trails DeSantis in a head-to-head race, with DeSantis at 47% and Biden at 43%. The Florida governor, who last month sailed to a second term in the Sunshine State, has significant standing nationwide. Two-thirds of Republican and Republican-leaning voters, 65%, want him to run for president in 2024. Let's see, just 24% hopes he doesn't. DeSantis' success may depend on having a one-on-one contest with Trump, said Paleologos. In a number of other Republican presidential candidates who would divide an anti-Trump vote, you have a recipe for a repeat of the 2016 Republican caucuses and primaries, when Trump outlasted the rest of a divided field. Okay. So that is what the USA Today says. USA Today reporting on a USA Today poll. Oh, goodness gracious. Okay. Pardon me. I was just looking at the chat room, and there's this group of people that keep spamming the chat room, and has to do with dates that you may be able to find. I don't know how many anyway. Sorry about that, Ty. Ty says, "You mean I can find love here?" No, you can't find love here, unless of course you love truth, in which case you can find it here. Okay, so USA Today, which is decidedly anti-Trump, comes up with a survey that is decidedly anti-Trump. Now, the question I have for you doesn't have anything to do with what I believe this article says or does not say. It has solely what you think about it. 817-379-2172, 817-379-2172. Do you believe, and let's just start with the first statement in this, do you believe that support for President Trump to run in 2024 has cratered? Yes or no, and why? 817-379-2172. Or you can get on the chat room. Let's see, I'm on several conservative discussion pages. I haven't seen such a decline in opinion. Okay? So do you believe that President Trump's, according to the USA Today Suffolk University poll, do you believe that his enthusiasm or his support to run in 2024 has, quote unquote, cratered? Yes or no, and why? 817-379-2172. Okay? I don't think so. I don't believe it's cratered. I believe that this is a statistical wobble. Okay? Because this is the first I've seen of it. Now, also, we just got finished with a torturous midterm election season. And President Trump hasn't probably helped himself out by starting the presidential run for 2024 with an announcement a couple of weeks ago. Okay? The people of the United States are tired of elections. They're tired of all of this. They want to enjoy their Christmas now. So why don't we just leave them alone and start thinking about this maybe, I don't know, June of next year, maybe? Okay? So I believe that once again, a media source, USA Today, whose reporting on President Trump has been decidedly negative in every possible opportunity, has come up with another negative piece of news on President Trump. I don't believe it's accurate. I believe that President Trump I believe his support and his base are just fine. Okay? Now, do I believe that Republican voters and conservatives are looking around at other candidates? Absolutely. And that takes me kind of to some of the logic flaws in this particular survey, right? What they say is they increasingly want Trumpism without Trump. This according to David Paleologos, the director of the Suffolk University Political Research Center. That is an absurd statement. Okay? The reason it's an absurd statement is because Ron DeSantis is not going to be a water carrier for Donald Trump's policies. Not only is he not going to be a water carrier for Donald Trump's policies, in other words, he'd be a presidency that was run by somebody else. Do you think the American people are going to put up with that again? Okay, you can say, did John David just say that the Biden administration was being run by somebody else? Yes, I said that. Do I believe it? Yes, I believe it. Okay, so, but the American people don't like it, and they're not going to put up with it again. All right, so for whatever that's worth. Anyway, Ron DeSantis is a creature of the Republican Party. Donald Trump is not. You can't have Trumpism that is pasteurized in a Republican oven. You can't have it. Because in order to have true Trumpist policies, you have to be able to tell the Republican Party to buzz off. And oh, by the way, President Trump did. President Trump did. He did that with Mitch McConnell on several different occasions. And Mitch McConnell returned the favor on several different occasions. The president, Donald Trump, is going to run in 2024. But you have to assume that the Republican Party is going to be a group of people that will fight him at every turn. And the reason is because they don't want another President Donald Trump term. Because Donald Trump will destroy the swamp this time. He's not going to just hurt it. He's going to destroy it. And he should. Now, you'll be amazed at how many of the swamp dwellers immediately clean themselves off and look like non-swamp dwellers as soon as, if Donald Trump is even successful. But believe me, if Donald Trump runs again against Joe Biden again, he'll win, regardless of what Karl Rove says. And what Karl Rove needs to understand also is he needs to understand that Kyrsten Sinema just left the Democrat Party. There are an awful lot of Republicans that want to leave the Republican Party too. And you need to understand that independent conservatism has a lot bigger voice than you've heard so far, Mr. Rove. And I could see Donald Trump running as an independent conservative. And I could see Donald Trump running as an independent conservative and winning, especially in a circumstance where Joe Biden is not going to run for re-election. If Joe Biden runs for re-election, he will lose. All that will happen if he decides to actually run, all that will happen is that nobody in the Democrat Party will have a chance to try to get a spark going for the Democrats in the primary season. The Democrat Party will be without a candidate. Except for Joe Biden. He will lose. So, people ask me what I thought about this survey. Okay, that's a survey, all right. But there are an awful lot of other surveys that are equally important. One of them is from Gallup. We'll be talking about that one coming up here in just a couple of minutes. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. So, is it possible? Is it possible that President Trump's reports His support has cratered. Yeah. But the numbers that they're indicating in their own survey, those aren't craters. Especially when you have 374 Republicans or independents leaning Republican. 374, really? Yeah, that's not a valid survey, in my view, and that's just my opinion. But let's just say it's all true. Is that going to change? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, it is. Meanwhile, Gallup has come up with a survey that names America's top problems in 2022. I don't think Donald Trump running in 2024 is on it, but let's find out next. This is the Wells Report. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Telephone number 817-379-2172. The Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch chat room is going on like wildfire. It seems many on both sides of the aisle fear another Trump presidency. More than likely for the reasons that I stated, says Mark. Yeah. You know, I do believe that politicians, this comes down to Donald Trump versus the politicians. And, you know, Americans need to decide whether they want politicians to run the country or themselves. I vote for us. I vote for we the people. We the people need to start electing ourselves instead of watching politicians elect themselves over and over and over again. That's the one problem I have with Ron DeSantis. He's being touted as the best possible Republican at the moment, okay, by Republicans. And Donald Trump is not a Republican, even though he says he wants to be and says he's working for the Republican Party and the success of the Republican Party. But the Republican Party is like a, shall we say, an evil girlfriend to Donald Trump. Yeah, they're frenemies. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about this other survey that talks about the real problems in America, according to Gallup. What's the number one problem again? Government. Government is the number one problem in America, according to Gallup research of American people. The next, inflation, the high cost of living. After that, the economy in general. After that, immigration. After that, unifying the country. COVID-19 is next. Race relations after that, actually tied at 4%. COVID-19, race relations, crime, all tied. Gas prices, judicial system, poverty, hunger, homelessness, abortion, ethics, morals, environment, all are mentioned by about 3% of the adults. Issues from mentions with less than 3%, not shown. And what's missing from there? Let's go back through the list again. Government is the biggest problem. The high cost of living and inflation, that's a government problem. So you could say that's already 35% of people not happy. The economy in general, again, that's a government problem, which makes it 47%. Unifying or immigration, rather, 6%. Well, now we're dealing with government issues, and now we're already at 53% of the American people citing a government issue as a problem. Unifying the country, well, that's more politics than anything else. But politicians run the government. So now we're at 58%. COVID-19, 4%, race relations, 4%, crime, 4%. Again, those are all issues having to do with the government. That makes it 65%. Gas prices, the judicial system, poverty, hunger, homelessness, abortion, ethics, morals, environment. Everything that they're listing here is a direct result of what the government has been doing in the last year. The data shows significant differences in partisan view of the nation's top problems. Republicans say the government, 25% of Republicans say the government's the problem. They say that 22%, high cost of living and inflation, 17%, the economy in general, are cited by Republicans as being problems. Democrats, 18% said the government is the problem. 10% said the high cost of living and inflation. 8% the economy in general. Independents, on the other hand, 16% say the government's the problem. 16% say the high cost of living and inflation. 12% said the economy in general. They're closer. The independents are closer to Republicans than Democrats. Amid a surge of COVID-19 cases at the start of 2022, the disease was named as the nation's top problem by 20% of U.S. adults. 13%, that was in January, 13% in February. In both cases, it ranked behind the government in March. COVID-19 infections receded. It dropped to 3%, has garnered no more than 1% of mentions for the last 6 months. After Russia invaded Ukraine, American mention of Russia as the top U.S. problem jumped from 2% to 9% in March. Although as the war continues, mentions of it as the most important problem dropped to 5% in April, has not been named by more than 1% of Americans in the latter half of 2022. U.S. Supreme Court Dobbs' decision in June overturned Roe v. Wade resulted in a record high 8% of U.S. adults naming abortion as the top U.S. problem. While the issue faded, mentions of the most important problem in subsequent months, it's remained elevated among Democrats. When it comes down to weapons, guns in the United States, yeah. After shootings in May at a New York grocery store and a Texas elementary school, Guns is the most important problem, mentioned by 8% of adults in June. Between August and December, no more than 2% of U.S. adults have named it. Guns not the issue. It's the government. The government is the issue. Because the government is the issue. The government is our problem. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. How about you? We need to do better at getting people in government that know why they're there, as opposed to making us wonder why they're there. This is the Wells Report. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this broadcast. We'll see you again tomorrow. Okay, beloveds, thank you very much for being a part of our show today. Anything right here at the last little second? Any alibis that you would like to say right off the bat? Because when I turn this thing off, it turns off the chat room. So anybody want to say anything else? I'm waiting. I'm waiting. I'm waiting. Okay. God bless all y'all. I will see you tomorrow. Mwah.